Can you believe it's Monday? It's Monday. What happened to the weekend? 1 minute it's Friday and you're thinking, fantastic, I got a whole weekend. And then, no, it's Monday again. Anyway, the sun is shining. Well, it is here. I don't know what it's like in Spain, in France, in all over America, in Germany, and everywhere else where everyone's watching and listening to the show. Hello, everybody. I'm What's Left of Russ Kane on Monday, the 14th of March, and miracle of miracles, we're still here. Speaking of people who are not here, he had to go. I couldn't bear it anymore. I couldn't bear it. The jackets, the cravats, the sheer impudence, the sheer I've been to Costco, so I'm superior. I couldn't take it anymore. So therefore, what better, what lovelier, what more amazing than having only this person as my wonderful co-host.
Good morning, Russ Kane.
Good morning, Chantal Rickards. OBE. I love to say that because that's how it is. There we are. We look nicer now, and somehow I've managed to get a background which reflects how we're all feeling at the moment. It's actually just blossom and water. But I thought, well, why not? That would be the nice thing to do. Normally on shows we go, and how was your weekend? Oh, it was fantastic. You know, no, I never do that. I never do that. Now, how was your weekend?
Actually, my weekend wasn't bad at all. Caught up with the BAFTAs last night.
Oh yes,
which was a bit of a thing. So rattled through that.
Did you go, or you just watched it?
No, it's a bit like work for me going to the BAFTAs.
Yeah.
So I was very happy to watch it from my sofa. Having voted, I mean, we finished our voting, as you know, I'm a BAFTA member, and we finished our voting on Tuesday at 6:00. So actually
last week.
Yeah.
Wow.
So very exciting to see what came through, and I was right on some of them and wrong on others.
How closely?
Yeah,
because I'm always fascinated how closely to what you thunked would do well to what actually did well.
That's an interesting question, because that's not the same as what I voted for. I think I knew what would do really well, but I didn't vote because I thought something would do well. I voted for what I thought should be.
You didn't go for Oscar bait, as my daughter always said. I said, what do you think of such a film? Oscar bait, Dad.
Yes, Oscar bait or BAFTA bait.
Yeah, BAFTA bait.
So there were some surprises and some that
Carry on up the Khyber. Did it walk away with the night?
Yes.
Sid James?
There were the sort of odd random things that somehow snuck in there. But generally, I think it was Ada out in force this morning, saying that people have sort of, voted with a little bit of wokeism in their mind as they were doing it. But I couldn't comment.
You know, there's a saying, and then we're going to get on to our terrific guest who's in the digital green room enjoying our digital coffee, digital tea, digital fabulous biscuit collection.
Excellent.
And she's looking at me, I can see her going, what? There's nothing here. I know, it's the digital world in which we live. Nothing is real. Now then, what I was going to say is woke, go broke. My theory, and I was not CEO of BAFTA Los Angeles, so you're much better than I am to judge this. My theory is they keep producing movies that we don't want to see. You want to kind of see it in Islington as you're having your Kappa Frappuccino, and everybody else is going, what a load of boring crap. They will lose money, and Hollywood only reacts to money, and so does any film producer, because it's a business. That's what it is.
Indeed.
Now, David Green, this is good because this is how perspicacious our wonderful listeners and viewers are. David says, good morning, Russ. Beautiful day in Durham. And you're going to be impressed, Chantal Rickards. Phil looks amazing this morning. He I don't know what it is. I'm really quite worried about Phil. I kept saying, are you sure? You really want to? But he's gone through with it. Then we've got what have we got? Hi, Chantal from Robert Van Buren. Robert Van Buren's actually a clockmaker, Chantas.
Oh,
but he sounds like he should be he sounds like he should be a Swedish DJ playing to 80,000 people in the stadium. Robert Van Buren, completely that. And this is very true. Phil has had a makeover. Everyone, you see, this is an audience.
It's the
This is
spring.
what I
Everybody
call
has
an
a
audience.
makeover in the spring.
And then Ramsey says, morning, Chantal and Russ. Hope you enjoyed the BAFTAs last night. I avoided it like the plague. What do you think of Rebel Wilson? She never crosses my mind. I thought she was okay. Great. I'm not being rude. I knew I didn't want to watch it because I knew that Chantal would watch it and carry the torch for a men's radio station and tell us everything we need to know. Everything we need to know. God, look at this. This is Sen. Sen is the greatest. He makes me laugh more than most people, but he is the greatest self-publicist on the planet. Only he could shoehorn this in. I hope I'll be at the BAFTAs with my feature film.
Ah.
It's called Carry On Up the Cypress. And it's going to be a great film, isn't it, Sen? Right, let's carry.
Sounds like more laughs than we had last night.
Oh dear! Now, David Wimble, who has been David Wimble, who, as you know, runs. He's the big boss of Deluxe Radio, where we're going out now, and we get about something like 65,000, 70,000 people just on Deluxe Radio. So we love David Wimble. I've known him for many years. Poor sausage got COVID. I hadn't heard from him because he owes me loads of phone calls. So I was about to get on the phone. And then he sent this message through to everybody. And oh my God, he is so ill. But David, we wish you better. Morning to you both. I thought Rebel Wilson was awful. Well, no idea. I can't comment.
Yes, I think the reviews won't be too kind.
She's a strange choice. Why can't we have a British actor/actress?
That was my immediate thought. Was I didn't quite understand why.
Why drag her in? She's not that current, is she? Am I missing? I mean, no, it's not my area. It's your area. So what? Am I missing something here?
I think your questions are absolutely valid. I wasn't quite sure why she was booked. Okay. She's pretty current, but her big news is that she's had a massive weight loss in the last.
Fantastic. There we are. There's headline news. The world is going to hell in a handcart, and Rebel Wilson's lost some weight. Fabulous. Yeah. I can get on with the rest of my day now, Chantal.
Yeah.
And this is the exciting news, breaking news. As ex-CEO of BAFTA Los Angeles, you'll be pleased to know this is the basic synopsis of Sen Monroe's film. It's about goat carnage in kebab shops, and apparently I play the kebab mafioso. That's all I need to know. I'm in. Right, let's bring on our fabulous guests. Let's shift gear. I say fabulous guests. I'm hoping they're good. I always say that. I always say that on radio and television, but you never know. Now, Louise and I have chatted and said hello.
Hello, Louise.
Catherine is there as well. Hello to you both.
Good morning, Catherine.
Good afternoon. I don't want to say good afternoon because it means that my day's gone, to be honest with you. Now, tell us why you're here, because at the moment I knew you were available, I'll be honest with you, if I may say that, these days, I grabbed you. Just saying.
Okay.
So, Catherine, do you want to kick off?
Yeah, well, thanks for talking to us. We've come to cheer up the nation by talking about death and grief.
Oh, great. So this is the comedy slot?
Yeah, well, it turns out we're not very good at looking at talking about it. And
no, we're not.
Next week we'll be holding, in fact, the second National Day of Reflection, which is about remembering people who have died outside of wars, because usually, of course, the only day of reflection we have is November the 11th.
Yeah.
And in preparation for that, Marie Curie, the End of Life charity, have done a really interesting survey of over 2,000 people. And what they found probably isn't going to startle you, but I think it's really worth talking about, and it's particularly worth talking about on men's radio, which is we don't talk about it. 77% of people feel that they can't talk about their grieving in front of other people after a short period of time. Although half of them feel that it would make them feel better if they could, because they'd be able to celebrate their person. And more than half of people feel that the reason that we don't talk about it is because everybody feels a bit awkward. They don't know what to say. They don't know how to talk about it. So Louise and I are kind of the yin and yang of end of life care. I'm an end of life care retired palliative care doctor. I'm campaigning for us understanding dying better and talking about the stuff up front, so we don't end up in bereavement with all those regrets about the things we haven't talked about. Yes. And Louise runs the bereavement services for the Marie Curie Hospice in Newcastle. So she's a bereavement and grief expert. So here we are. We're like the weather girls.
but more talented and more interesting. Thank God you're not the cheeky girls, because I'd have to leave. Now, funnily enough, I was chatting and we put it on the show with Mr. Motivator about this very, very subject, because I know he's one of your spokespeople. And Derek was, I didn't know where the conversation was going to go. Derek was fabulous. This is, and just to let both of you ladies know, by the way, 50% of our audience are women. So it's not an exclusive men's thing. We thought it might be, but no. And everybody is, of course, welcome. Why is it? No, let me put it another way. One of the most infuriating things, I think, when somebody dies, I'm not going to say passes, let's use the proper word. Somebody dies, and you don't hear from a close friend or a relative, and they turn around to you and they say, "Oh, well, I didn't know what to say." It's awful. It causes a lot of problems. Do you agree?
We hear this all the time, don't we, Louise? I'm gonna let you just talk about what you do in your service, because it's exactly about this.
I think there's a lot of fear. I think people are frightened of making things worse, and perhaps they're worried that if they speak to somebody, that will be too much for the person, or the person will burst into tears and then they won't know what to do. I think it's important to know that you don't have to have a special face or use special words or talk in a special way when you're talking to somebody who's grieving. The most hurtful thing is for that person who's grieving to feel ignored, to feel that they've got nowhere to turn to. So we're very keen that people know that they don't have to struggle on alone. And for anybody listening who's wondering what they can do when the National Day of Reflection comes up a week on Wednesday, on the 23rd of March, well, you can join in the minute's silence at midday. And you can simply reach out to somebody. Perhaps you might not have heard from them for a while. You know that they're grieving. You might not know what to say, but just simple words like, "I'm thinking of you. I'm here if you do want to talk." That can go a long way.
The great myth, I know I've said this. I said this to Derek, Mr. Motivator, and I've said it so many times on this show, so I've got personal experience of it, unfortunately, is this: you're not expecting someone to come up and give, Hamlet's soliloquy and be words of absolute genius.
Sure.
But just, "You're okay." That's enough. It doesn't need to be any more clever or longer than that. Just the simplest phone call. But that terrible thing, I mean, I had it when people would cross the road. They still do, but for different reasons. But people would actually cross the road, and somehow that death is contagious. I don't mean COVID. I mean, the notion of death is contagious. We're useless at handling it. I mean, a lot of people really are. What you do is so important. So important. I hope. I wonder, because you're immersed in it. You do it day after day. Do you understand, from our standpoint, just how vital what you do and Marie Curie does, just how vital it is to everybody? I wonder if you do.
Well, that's really good to hear. I mean, I do hear from the clients that I work with in the Northeast. And of course, we have our national support line as well at Marie Curie that people can contact. I think it can make a lot of difference for people knowing that they're not alone, that they have a companion for their grief, somebody who knows the territory, really, because it can feel very unfamiliar and frightening when you're newly bereaved. You think you might anticipate the sorts of things that you're going to feel, but it's the unpredictability of it. A thought or hearing something on the radio can just plunge you into that rawness of your loss. And knowing that can happen, and just having someone to talk to about that.
You know what it is? They always say haunting is like, woo, and something terrible, usually Victorian, comes out the woodwork and scares the crap out of you. That's not haunting at all. Being haunted and it's the theme. One of the things in my last book is that you're walking down the street and you smell a perfume, and suddenly, boom, you're triggered.
yes.
Or you're walking down the street and somebody way up the road look, and you think, "Oh my God, that's..." Well, obviously, there's not. They can't be. So stupid things. Or you go past a particular shop. Doesn't matter. That's what being haunted is. It's really not, a vampire suddenly rising up and coming through your window. And the other thing is, and help me out with this if you would, that it gets very lonely. It can be horrendously lonely because you've got, when somebody's very ill, you're in the hospice or the hospital, and that's your center of your life. I'm sure this must be your experience. Then you've got the funeral, so you've got to plan the funeral. Everyone's there, and it's all very, and suddenly it's like falling off a cliff.
Yeah. And we
There's
hear
nothing.
that all the time. We hear that all the time, and we're very aware of it. And really, I think one of the things I love the day of reflection to do, as well as helping everybody who's bereaved to feel that they are not alone, that they're part of a community of grief across the nation, is to talk to all of us, grieving and not, to say, can we do better? Can we be better at stepping up? Can we come to people and offer to be companions in their distress? That's the thing that makes us anxious.
Oh, that's
that they're
really
going to
good.
be
Say that
distressed.
phrase again. That was marvelous.
Companions. So this is a phrase I use. I've written about this. My book is called Listen. And it's about these conversations because people think they need to know what to say. But actually, very often, just being alongside somebody who needs to have a cry, who needs to just sit and think about things. Maybe you dispense the tissues, you make the tea, you might say the occasional word, but you don't need to know what to say. You need to know how to be.
This is such a myth.
So,
I received, I've said this many times, but this is the level of what we're talking about, right? I got a letter about six years after my wife died, right? I got a letter from someone who'd been a very close friend, we'd been on holiday together and had disappeared into the woodwork, right? Never heard from them once. Dear Russ, blah, 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 blah. There was a misunderstanding. And I wrote back, I'm not going to tell you what the two words were, but the last word was off. But I wrote back and I said, could you tell me what part of someone had cancer and someone died is the misunderstanding? What are you not following here? I'm not trying to do Schrodinger's cat, all the quantum physics. This is just rubbish. It was a misunderstanding. That was the most extreme example.
yeah.
And it's, so I've been very vocal about it. I don't care, because my view was I didn't want to be Yoko Ono, professional widower. But what I did want to do is anyone can learn or benefit, and they might look at what I've done and think, well, that was garbage, or they might just be able to glean something. And if they do, fabulous. But it's got to stand for something. Otherwise, it's just pointless, isn't it? It's all pointless.
Yeah.
But you know what I mean. This whole.
Well, we'd love people to join in on Wednesday of next week. There'll be stuff happening online. If you've got friends and relatives who don't do online, maybe you can print out the page and show them, and then go around with your tech and help them join in.
You've never met my relatives; they can't read. Really.
So there's the lovely Mel Giedroyc, who we learnt on Bake Off is not just funny, but also a foodie. She's hosting several other foodies in conversations about how we show our love through food and the important role of food in grieving and the loneliness of not having that person at your table.
Look, I put on a couple of pounds. I think you're being a little personal.
Okay, it's a little unfair. Unfair.
All right. Okay. Just it was all going well,
but Mel will be funny. But the thing what I'd like people to join in is I've got the pleasure of sitting down with national treasure Julia Samuel, who is the most fantastic grief counsellor, grief therapist. And she and I are doing a kind of double act of how might we assemble our own grief toolkit for the approach into dying, and then looking after each other during bereavement and looking after ourselves during bereavement. And those things are going to be available on demand afterwards as well if people can't join us on the day.
Idea.
Yeah, great idea.
That's really very clever. I tried to, it was a long time ago, right? And I tried to prepare, but it still smacks you in the face, and that's all there is to it. And I took a lot of steps because it was it was inevitable. It wasn't like she was hit by a bus, which you got no time to prepare for. So or whatever, hit by the International Space Station. So it's so important. So you and people can go online and discuss this, with you, or this is going to be a live broadcast? So what's the deal with you and the toolkit, etc.?
So they can watch. It's going to be on at 6 o'clock, and it's on the Marie Curie website. So also live on the Marie Curie website, of course, is the Marie Curie Support Service. So there's a chat service on their website as well as a national telephone helpline. So we want people to feel that they can find someone to listen, and we want the people who are currently the people who don't know what to say to stop worrying about what to say and just step up and say, hey, I don't know what to say, but I'm guessing it's pretty awful.
Oh,
yeah.
Thank you. You see, it's absolutely fine. There's not many things that I can discuss with great knowledge, but sadly, this I can. It's absolutely fine to say, hey, I don't know what the hell to say, but that's it. You've said it.
Yeah.
You've said it. That's it. That's okay.
I think offers of practical help are good for those who are more tongue-tied, because everybody can say, you know, can I come and, you know, mow the lawn this weekend to help out, or can I take clothes to the dry cleaner for you? And that's a way of showing compassion without having to sit down and feel as though they've got to listen to somebody talking and crying, which people find difficult. I mean, they do genuinely find that difficult.
Well, it's not great. I mean, let's not beat around the bush. It's not great. You do feel, but you have to get you have to motor past that, because I'd like to say it's not about you. It's about that person. So put your personal, this is embarrassing, God, I hate this, to one side, and thank God it's not you, and be a little bit compassionate. You know, and practicality is so good. How long have we got you for? Because I know you're so busy, both of you today. Have I run out of time with you guys? Are you all right?
Good for a while yet. That's fine.
Marvelous. That's fantastic. Practical things like, no, I'm going to ask another question. You obviously do a lot of research and you must speak to hundreds and thousands of people. Is it their experience that people you thought would be there weren't there, and the most unlikely people suddenly step up and are fantastic? Do you hear that story?
I hear that all the time, and people can feel quite hurt that those people that they thought would be there for them aren't, and then help can come from unexpected quarters. So that's something as well to bear in mind when you're thinking, well, should I get in touch? I haven't been in touch for a long time, you know, is it still going to be okay? Well, yes, very much so. It's very welcome.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, sorry, Russ. I was just going to say, out of interest, I'd love to know how you handle grief and bereavement, because clearly bereavement is very much an end process for the people who are left behind. But there is also the moment of grief that if you know that you're at the end of your life, you will be too going through a form of sort of early bereavement, a form of loss of your own life, and you know that you're not going to see your friends and family. How do you talk to people about that? That must be really difficult.
That's really important, and it's an important part of the job in palliative care, but also in general practice or geriatrics, or anybody who looks after people who have difficult and life-limiting illnesses. Julia Samuel has a lovely phrase. She calls those living losses. And, you know, as somebody's becoming more and more unwell or less and less energetic, they lose the ability to do things that matter to them, and that's a grief. It's difficult to hold your role in the family in the same way, and that's another grief. You may give up your job, and that's another grief. So loss after loss after loss. And it's really important to help people by listening to that. And one of the things that can also be really helpful is to help families to step back a little bit, because sometimes the loss happens because everybody wants to help so much that they do you out of what you can still do too early. So helping people to do what they can and recognizing they haven't got the energy to do as much or to the same level can be a really useful way of helping people. One of the things that we do is to help people to think of themselves no longer as perhaps the coalface worker, but the person, the manager, the person who runs the house, the person who calls the shots, and everybody else says yes and tugs the forelock and does what they've commanded. So they're still in charge. It's just the way they're in charge is different.
I think you've just described my mini schnauzer. To be absolutely honest with you, in charge of everything and just oversees everything. That's what she does. Here's a very good message. It's from David Wimble, who at the moment is really unwell with COVID, but I'm delighted he's joined us. He says this: I have a pretty standard message I send. Simply, there are no words I can write that could come close to express the pain you're going through. But just know you're surrounded by good friends who all want to offer you friendship and help if you want it. That's from David, down on the coast in Kent.
Lovely.
I think those are good words. Those are good words. You know,
Yeah.
if people want to be practical, turning up with some food that's cooked, I don't mean ingredients, or even doing shopping is lovely. But, you know, I get a ring on the doorbell and there'll be food from the most unlikely sources. It was extraordinary. Not that I can't cook. It was not the point. But it was such a lovely gesture. And it makes you feel, you know, I'm going back a long time, but I remember it so clearly. You know, it makes you feel better, to put another term. Just something as simple as that.
Yeah,
You know?
and those practical things are really useful, aren't they?
Oh, God,
Because
yeah.
as Chantal was saying, you know, if you just go along and say, "Oh, if you need anything, ask me," you're too disorganized and exhausted in grief to reach out and
Yeah.
ask, and you don't even know what you
Mhm.
want. So arrive with a pie, or like you say,
Yes. Oh, perfect.
the grass is starting to grow. This is the time of year where people are going to be triggered, as you were saying before, Russ, by the memory of the garden never looked like this when that person was alive. So the garden looking unruly is another reminder. So somebody who goes around and does some weeding or cuts the grass or sweeps the yard or whatever it is can make a huge difference. And we don't need to be in the house. We don't need to be entertained. We don't need to be given cups of tea. We can just arrive and leave and be helpful.
Lovely,
And
because
if
I
you-
think
Sorry.
I was just going to say, I think in early grief, that's the time when our energy is taken up so much with the task of grieving that lots of tasks can feel, day-to-day things can just feel overwhelming. So it's really hard to do the washing up or put the bins out, and just somebody to help with things like that.
And I can add as well that you get this is, I mean, on Men's Radio, we pride ourselves, we just tell it like it is. We don't sort of dance around the edges of it. You are swamped with paperwork. The paperwork is enormous. It's like an avalanche of this. Now, most people are not great with paperwork to start with. Your head has turned to a mozzarella pizza. You don't know which way is up. And suddenly, but the one thing is everything else keeps trundling along. The mortgage, the rates, the lights, the heating, the credit card. Nothing stops. Because it's not like they don't have compassion. It's irrelevant to them. And I get that. And we have to be grown up about it. You can't say, oh, but there isn't a but. You know, the mortgage needs, all of that stuff. So if someone doesn't want to start mowing the lawn and sweeping the yard and everything else, to help with paperwork is a huge, huge boon. And forgive me, I know the three of you are now going to throw very heavy objects at my head. But how many times have you heard as professionals, and I'm sure Chantal has heard it as well, when the man of the house dies and the wife or the partner says, oh, you know, Fred did everything. And suddenly they think, well, I don't know how to, he took care of this for the last 30, 40 years. I don't know what to do. Stepping in those circumstances is so helpful. And it's not patronizing, and it's nothing to do with sexism. It's to do with being practical and helpful. Am I allowed to say that in 2022? I don't know what I'm allowed to say anymore.
Hear it
I'll
a
just
lot,
say it.
and it works both ways, doesn't it? You know,
Sure.
you can be faced with all sorts of tasks depending on what's been divvied out in your relationship, what you're familiar with. You know, you need to be thinking about doing all sorts of unfamiliar things. How does the washing machine work? What's under the car bonnet or whatever? So yeah, it just plunges you into absolutely unfamiliar territory in so many ways, in terms of your inner world, and also in terms of the practical things that you need to see to in life. And I think you don't need to actually know the person to be supportive. You know, that person who's struggling for change when they get on the bus. They might have been recently bereaved. That person who's calling you to talk about pension arrangements or life insurance, if you're relating to them in a more human way, if you're giving them time, that can go a long, long way, rather than them ending up feeling that that nobody cares at all in that moment, and that can be a very alienating, painful place to be.
I'd love to know how you treat children in this respect. How you, as professionals, would speak to a child who has lost somebody very close, maybe a sibling or possibly a parent, but how parents should talk to their children. I wouldn't know where to start, quite simply.
It's not fun, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, I think to be as inclusive as possible. Children grieve in different ways at different ages as well. I think the old idea was to exclude children from things like funerals, whereas we know now that with support that can be very helpful.
At what age, may I say?
Well, I always say to start really, really early. I say when you're out with your kids in a buggy and there's a dead beetle on the ground, pick it up and talk about the dead beetle.
Wow.
And actually,
Really?
there it is, and give it a prod. And what's dead then? Well, look, it isn't moving. Is it just asleep? No, it's not the same as asleep.
Wow.
And what's going to happen now is that its body's going to turn back into soil, and then the plants can grow from it, and new beetles can eat the leaves of those trees. And that's how the world works. And we're doing it in a normal voice, and we're talking about it because it's interesting, and kids are so curious and they just want to know more and more.
I've
Because
never heard that before.
the
No, that's fascinating.
least good time to start talking to a child about death is the day after somebody they love has died. The second least is probably the week before a person they love is about to die. If we can weave ordinary dying into children's understanding of the life cycle from them being very little, so we're talking about it when it's not emotional for us, then that helps us to have some language to use.
Why is this not better known? That, I mean, both I can see from Chantal's expression, and I'm going, wow, in my inside what passes in my head. Why has this not been promoted more?
We do try, don't we, Louise? There were lots and lots of us.
I've never heard this before.
But
Never.
there was a call for comments on school key curriculum for that part of the curriculum that's about human growth and behaviour and relationships. And there were lots and lots of calls for schools to include full life cycle, including end of life. And it still has not been fully incorporated into the national curriculum
because it's so much more important to have sines, cosines, and logarithms, which I have never used, or equations since I was 15 or whatever, and taking my O-level. Never once. You're so right. I don't understand because school is for education, and education should be for life. You've got people coming out. They don't understand a budget. They don't understand a basic household budget. I was going to say write a check, but that makes me sound 200. And what you're suggesting is a superb idea.
Yeah. What do you think? As my background is in film and television, I'd really like to know what you think about how you educate people, or can you educate people around bereavement and loss through films that they see, television programs. I'm sure we all once watched Truly, Madly, Deeply, which for me was heartbreaking in so many ways, but an absolutely seminal television program that was all about loss and bereavement. But, you know, something as crazy as The Lion King actually may be helpful, possibly to help explain to children about the whole life cycle. I'd love your views on that.
I think it's this whole thing, isn't it, that death is a part of life. It's a normal, natural part of life. You know, on the whole, it's what happens to all of us. And the more that we see examples in front of us on television or in film of people talking about death and dying, I think that does help. That does help to educate and normalize these sorts of conversations about death and dying.
Yeah, I would agree. And I would say that when you think about the public understanding of birth, it appears in drama and in documentary all of the time, doesn't it? And probably the whole nation knows about contractions and waters breaking and different ways in which we can assist if suddenly somebody is taken short giving birth at a bus stop or whatever. Yeah.
My nightmare.
But actually what's happened is we have been educated about dying from screens, but we've been badly educated. We've been shown sensationalized deaths that actually are about moving the plot forward in a drama, not about documenting dying. And they're all about what's happening to the people around the bed rather than what's happening to the person in the bed.
Yeah.
And so we've got really bad reference points for ordinary dying. So the public don't understand that ordinary dying, just like giving birth, is a biological bodily process that has very clear stages that happen in more or less the same order, but perhaps for slightly different lengths of time from one person to another. So that it's normal to expect a person will be more tired in the months and weeks before they die, that it's normal to expect that a person will need more sleep in the last few weeks of their life, gradually being awake less and asleep more. It's normal to expect that some of the time we can't fully wake those people up because they're not just asleep, they're actually starting to become unconscious as their brain is starting to shut down. It's normal for people not to want to eat. Families get so frightened that the person isn't eating. The gut is slowing down. It's not absorbing nutrients anymore. They aren't hungry. But because food is love, we feel terrible about it. So make teeny tiny tastes of delicious things and stop worrying about the amount the person is going to eat. It's normal for a person who's at the very edge of death to mainly be unconscious. And when we're unconscious, our breathing sounds very strange. It doesn't sound like normal sleep. And most people haven't heard it before.
It's
And so they
awful.
misinterpret it.
It's awful.
It is noisy, isn't it? And it's
scary
stop-start.
It's scary as hell.
And it
very
looks
disturbing.
like hard work. And what we
it's
need
very
to be
disturbing.
doing is midwifing dying, is being in the room with you as you're watching that happening to this person you love and saying, what do you think is happening? Because families say, are they choking? Are they drowning? Are they in pain? Are they trying to talk? Actually, no, this breathing tells me that this person that you love is now deeply, deeply unconscious. They're not experiencing distress. This is what ordinary dying looks like. They are dying safely. If they're rousing because they're uncomfortable, that's not okay. And we need to be sorting out whatever the pain is, because pain, of course, is caused by the illness, not by dying. Dying doesn't cause anything other than gradual unconsciousness, and then your breathing will very gradually stop. Any symptoms are of the illness itself. What were we doing before to manage the symptoms? Are we still doing that? Where are those drugs? How are we giving them? How do we make sure the person stays comfortable? So should the children be in the room? Well, yeah, if we tell children not to come in the room, they will imagine what's going on is so terrible that they can't see it. I can see Louise really nodding. So come on in and see Grandad. He looks as though he's asleep. We can't wake him up anymore. He's making very snory breathing, but he is okay. Why don't you sit on the bed with him? Why don't you talk about your picture that you've drawn? Why don't you give him a kiss and go back down the garden or whatever? Let's make this okay. And if the children are in the room at the moment that the dying is happening, what are they going to see? They're going to see pauses in the breathing. They're going to see somebody's face relaxing so much that the muscles look flat and they don't quite look like themselves anymore.
Yeah.
They're going to see longer pauses, and then at some point the breathing will stop, and people usually haven't noticed it. because
It's
it
very
isn't like
strange. My
EastEnders.
daughter was with me when my dad died, and she was convinced it was. I can remember. I'd forgotten this actually. She was convinced he was still breathing. I said, "No, he's gone. He's gone." And they do look different when somebody
Yeah.
dies. It's going back to sort of what Chantal's point and your brilliant answer to it. They don't look like they're asleep. Forgive me for being graphic. They don't. It's completely different. If you see someone who has died, I mean, just a few minutes ago, a minute ago, they don't look like they're asleep. They
Yeah.
look dead. And I can't explain what it is, but whatever, you can be religious, you can be a biological, I don't know, because I have no answers to any of it. But it's as though that life force, some people call it the soul, whatever it is, I don't know, it's gone. And whoever that person was is somewhere else now. They've gone.
Yeah.
And what's there is it's like a shell.
And I think
I
was just going to say, I think that's quite awe-inspiring and mysterious, and it can lead us to have all sorts of questions again about what is meaningful and important for us in our lives. And bereavement can be a great opportunity to do that and reevaluate. Really take a hold of what's important to us in our life.
I'd like to know whether you think that the end of life practice by different people of religious faith, whether one is better than the other, because in some people of faith bury their dead very, very quickly and it's sort of over and done with super fast. Others, I was watching the wonderful film Belfast, which is truly good and actually handles death incredibly well. But there, of course, generally, and I think now, even today, that they will still have the moment of the body in the coffin in the house. So I'd be really interested to know whether you think one is better than the other, whether it's better just to have sort of clean break and that you never see the body again, or whether you should wait for 2 weeks to have a funeral and for people to be allowed to get used to it. I clearly don't know the answer to it, so I'd love to know your thoughts on that.
I think that whatever is usual for you in your culture, with your family, with your community, that's what's important. And of course, that's what the pandemic has so often got in the way of. People haven't been able to mourn, to have those rituals in the way that they would have wanted. I think it's important to do things in the way that you're comfortable with. I think funerals and all those kinds of grieving rituals are for the living, and therefore for the support of the living.
Yeah, I think also because we missed being able to gather for funerals over the last couple of years. I think it's worth saying it's never too late. That ritual is really, really important to us, whether that's a religious ritual or a completely secular ritual, for us to be able to gather even 2 years after somebody has died, to remember them, to think about them, to laugh about the things that we loved about them, to weep together, to tell stories. And, you might want to engage a celebrant. You might want to do it in your temple, your mosque, your church. You might want to do it in the park. You might want to build a sandcastle on the beach and let the tide wash it away. Whatever it is that you want to do.
You're very poetic.
Gathering.
You're extraordinarily poetic. I'm serious. No. I'm not being facetious.
Thank you. I'm a writer. I write about this stuff.
Yeah. Makes me feel even worse with my writing. Let me read this, and then I've got a question I really want to ask you both. This is from Brian Levison. It says, I won't put it up because then you'll disappear, which is very rude on my behalf. So community is everything in times like these. I helped form a residents association in my block of flats. As well as addressing issues, we found a bonding amongst all races, genders, etc. It's also brilliant self-help group. So finding plumbers, mechanics, etc. becomes a piece of cake. Don't be shy about reaching out. And that, if we take away anything from this has been one of the most fascinating conversations. You two are just extraordinary. It's lovely having Chantal here with a completely different approach. It is about reaching out. it's don't be very British about it. Just reach out. What's the worst that's going to happen? What's the worst? It's not you that's dead. Reach out. Let me ask you. I'd like to ask both of you this. I'm going to start with the writer, Catherine. Is this? Do you think when somebody is dying, they need permission to go?
Oh, that's a great question.
Wow, that is a great question.
That's a great question. And so here's the thing about the moment of dying that we really, really don't understand. And it's this. We know that people usually are deeply unconscious before they take their last breath. But we've always also assumed that people can hear even when they're unconscious. And we assumed that actually from evidence of people who've had head injuries in intensive care units, who then were able to describe people who'd come in to visit or conversations they'd overheard or snippets afterwards. But recently, there's some good research out of Canada, out of the University of British Columbia, which people who were dying agreed to wear little headsets that recorded their brain waves. And you could see the brain waves going through those transition states of awake to asleep to unconscious, but you can also see the brain responding when there are noises in the room. So we do continue to hear. Whether we make sense of it or not, that experiment can't show, but the brain continues to respond to sound until very late. Now, the reason I'm saying that as my preamble is we recognize that over and over again, we look after people in their own homes, in hospitals, in our hospices, where families have got rotas. The person's never alone for a moment. And yet, the 1-2 minute period when the two people who were on duty, one had to go to the loo and the other one got called away to the phone, that's the moment the person stops breathing. What is that about? We have absolutely no idea. But it seems to happen more often than would just happen by chance.
Yeah.
And so much so that we warn families to expect that it can happen and not to be hurt by it, that some people in some way might need more privacy. Maybe those bonds of love are too strong to just let yourself relax into dying while everybody's in the room. And the other thing that we know is that there are some people who somehow their dying is taking a lot longer than we were expecting. And they're waiting for something. They're waiting for an announcement like a baby's been born or an exam has been passed or a person's managed to travel from the other side of the world to get there. Or maybe they're waiting for permission. And we do talk to families about saying, Mum, I'm going to be all right. And I promise I'll look after Dad. And it's okay now. You can go if you need to. We're ready. We'll be sad, but we're ready. And very often that is the conversation that then allows the dying to be completed. And we don't understand it, but we recognize it from having been at so many thousands of deathbeds that it is a thing.
Extraordinary.
Yeah.
Hear it all the time, Catherine.
Absolutely fascinating. Just harking back a little bit, not a complete non sequitur, but a bit my question about religious belief. Does the way that you talk to somebody, whether you believe in life after death or not, does that have an effect on how you speak to the person who is receiving who is bereaved? So would you talk differently, or would you sort of shut down your own thoughts, or would you say it's all right, he's going to go to heaven, if you believed in heaven?
I think there's a commonality, isn't there? It's a universal experience, death and dying. There's so much more that we have in common as human beings than is different or specialized or divides us. So if that's your language, I think it's always important to be mindful of the frame of reference wherever you can of the person that you're talking to. Yeah, if that's your frame of reference, and perhaps that can offer something to that person, even if it isn't theirs.
Maybe.
Here's a question. I've got so many comments and stuff coming in. It's beautiful. But this is from Ramsey, who's a regular. So how far into unconsciousness does the brain stop reacting to outside noise?
So I haven't seen the recordings from that piece of work. It was published, I think, in late 2019 or early 2020. So it is quite recent, but it's from the University of British Columbia in Vancouver. So people could go and find it. But my impression from the text was that there were responses until really quite close to death.
Wow.
Which is, always when we're looking after dying people or people who are unconscious who aren't dying, we talk to them. We don't turn somebody in bed without saying to them first, we're about to move you, or, we're bringing something in now that's going to be very noisy. And I've had the honor of helping the nurses when they've been washing somebody and preparing their body after they've died, and they talk to them all the way through.
Mm-hmm.
It's
As do
part of
many
respecting
funeral
the person.
directors. Yeah. Mm.
Golly gosh. Here's another. This is a difficult question because I've had experience of both. And again, it's a theme we've dealt with a lot on men's radio on this show. And that is this, that if you're working in a hospital, and the hospitals were magnificent, by the way, let me just preempt before anyone says I'm being rude. I'm not. They were fantastic. They are sworn to prolong life. And if you're in a hospice, it's my preference, I'll be quite honest about it, it's to try and make that passage as easy and as painless as possible. And I know that the nurses were just, it was upsetting them so much because it was pointless. And I'm sorry to be blunt about it, but prolonging the life, which was inevitably going to end, was pointless, and yet it went on. And I just feel, do you think there should be some sort of, and I know it goes right to the heart of what medicine is about, what hospitals and doctors and nurses are sworn to do, but do you think there is a point at which you should say, look, this is, I mean, you wouldn't do it to a dog. Okay. And I said that many times, you wouldn't do it to your dog if your dog was suffering.
Right. I'm going to challenge your assumption, first of all, that hospitals are all out for cure and that hospices are only for dying in, because I've worked in both. And my last 10 years of medical practice, I would do my weekly practice was with a hospital palliative care liaison team, and my evenings and weekends on call were for a local hospice, the Marie Curie Hospice, in fact. So many's the time I have transferred patients in both directions.
Gosh.
You might have somebody in the hospice trying to sort out their pain, not expected yet to be dying for perhaps months, maybe a year or more, who has a crisis that is reversible and they would like it reversed, please, and they will go to hospital. So you're not obliged to die if you go to a hospice. This is actually really important. And in fact, your first admission to a hospice, you've got more than a 50% chance of going home again, because you're almost certainly in for symptom management and not end-of-life care. Hospices are the intensive care units, if you like, for palliative care. They're where we put the people with the problems that are going to require a really skilled team all around them to try and sort out whatever the challenge is, whether that's their fear or their breathlessness or their itch or their bowels or their family dynamics, whatever it is, that those are where we have our experts. And some of the time we bring our experts in. So the equivalent person to Louise and her team might have come in to help with a family that was wondering about how to talk to the children about getting ready for somebody to die and getting to know the family. So they're not meeting them for the first time in bereavement. They're actually helping to set them up for their bereavement in the first place. Similarly, in hospital, we recognize futility. We recognize that this is no longer for somebody's benefit. And now we have to have a discussion with that about the person. I think the difficulty is this. We have a nation of people who don't know what dying looks like. I've just described dying live on radio. And there will have been people listening to that going, oh, yeah, that's exactly what we saw. Did you know that was what we did? Hey, did we see that? Other people going, oh, wow, those funny noises that we heard when we thought he was choking and we thought he was drowning, that's just part of being unconscious. And I've had loads and loads of letters about that in response to the book I wrote about dying. So because we don't know as a nation what dying looks like, and we take people from that group and we train them to be nurses, doctors, paramedics, healthcare professionals, social workers, whatever, they still don't know what dying looks like, and we train them to save lives, and then we send them out to work. Until we actually train people to be confident, and I'm going to use that word companions again, confident companions at the bedside of dying people, where what you do isn't nearly as important as how you behave, what your demeanor is, what you're prepared to talk about, the things you're going to allow the person to talk about, and you will listen to them. And instead of reassuring them that, oh, we don't need to worry about that, we've got great treatments these days, we put things down, and the person says, am I so sick I could die? You put everything down and you say, tell me what makes you ask me that. I want to understand how this feels from your point of view. If you were so sick that you could die now, would you want to know that? Would you want me to talk to you about that?
Wow.
And that's a complete change in the way we deal with people, because it isn't doing to, it's being with. And it allows them to understand how sick they are and to make decisions about whether they should continue to have a feeding tube down their nose or lots of drips, or whether they should say, actually, do you know what? I don't like being in hospital. I don't like being surrounded by machines. It's noisy all night. It's noisy all day.
Yes, yes.
I would rather be somewhere else where you haven't got all this kit and I can be contented.
Yeah.
Wow.
Extraordinary.
Yes, you too. My God. Absolutely an extraordinary conversation. And judging by all the and here's another thing, just as we head up towards the end. This is from Paul Claridge. He says, and this is coming to terms and being prepared, which is a huge other area as well. We can talk about that for hours. I think I struggled more to come to terms with my dad's death, says Paul, than my mum's death. Mum was terminally ill, so we knew she was coming to the end of her life. Okay.
Yeah.
But Dad, who died 11 years before, was killed in a road accident at the age of 59. He was taken from us suddenly without warning on a normal sunny April day on his way to work.
Oh,
he couldn't prepare for the grief. I don't know which is worse. Well, they're both terrible. I mean, you know, it's like a real Sophie's choice. But it, at least you've got a chance. If somebody is terminally ill, you can kind of do your best to prepare, whatever the best might be in each personal circumstance. And when somebody is killed in a car crash or something, wow.
Yeah, I think
it's so sudden.
From my own perspective, unexpected death, I think, is far more polaxing than expected death.
I think it absolutely must be. I think it absolutely must be, because you're expecting, you know, in Paul's case, expecting Dad to come home from work. It's just an average day, whatever. Boom. Suddenly you're not there. And that's beyond falling off a cliff. That is so shocking.
Yeah.
So shocking. I mean, thank goodness I haven't had to experience that, but I'm not sure how I'd get through it. Awful. Absolutely awful, Chantal. You know. Horrible.
Terrible.
I'm going to say thank you to you, but you both have been amazing. Really, would you come back at some point? I know you're ever so busy, and I'm sure you're hugely in demand from every media outlet, but you know you've really resonated with our viewers and listeners all over the world.
Yeah.
Thank you. Would you come back at some point? If I make the digital green room nicer for you,
we'll have biscuits next time.
Yeah.
We'll send you real life.
We love a good old death chat, and actually, thank you for giving it this amount of time, because it's so important.
I didn't know that we had you for this long. I'm delighted. It was a wonderful surprise. I thought you'd be in and out and you know, roundabout. Thank you so much, Catherine. Thank you so much, Louise.
Thank you
wish
both.
you well with everything that you do. Thanks a lot.
Great chat.
Wowza.
Honestly,
what amazing women.
I take my hat off to them. It's fantastic. It's wonderful work. It really, really is.
And I want to say this. It was always my dream with Men's Radio that we could have these conversations.
Yeah.
And not have to try and shoehorn everything into a 4-minute soundbite. You can't do it. We haven't even touched the sides with this. You can't do that.
Yeah.
And also not to shy away from things which, you know, don't get normal in case somebody gets offended. Well, it's going to happen to all of us.
I couldn't agree more, Russ.
All
I mean,
of us,
it's, talking about this stuff really helps. It helps everybody. And these women are just fantastic at what they do.
Great. Absolutely great. And the other thing is this, I suppose if we've drawn two things, is one, you're not alone.
Yeah.
You're not alone. Your experience is being shared by, it doesn't help you, but understand that you're not alone. And two, just reach out. It doesn't matter in what form you do it, but just reach out. Honestly, I can tell you it makes the world of difference. We will be back Wednesday again. I am thrilled to say
looking forward to it
with Chantal Rickards, OBE. I love saying that.
Oh,
until then, try to stay out of trouble, and we will see you Wednesday at 12 o'clock.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.